Hi everyone, welcome to my SIA analysis, Cotton Farming in Madhya Pradesh. My name is Julia Holland. As a brief introduction, Madhya Pradesh is a state in central India. It is the state with the most organic cotton farming in India. India is the largest producer of cotton in the world. They produced 5,897,000 metric tons in 2016 and 2017, which is when this study takes place. The global production, for context, is 23,212,000 metric tons as of 2016-2017, and they're the second largest exporter of cotton, right behind the United States. For context, that is 1,255,000 metric tons that they exported in the year 2016-2017. So these are the research questions that this SIA explored. I'm not going to read through all of these just for the sake of time, but if you are interested, feel free to pause and read through these to get a little bit of a better idea at what kinds of things they were looking at. This SIA also performed an EIA, so if you are interested in looking at the questions that environmental impact analysis is looking at, these are those. So the methods used were a large-scale survey for the quantitative data that relied heavily on IHDS data, which is a little bit similar to the United States Census as far as being demographic data. It measured labor input by men, women, and children, who are the primary farmers when it comes to organic cotton. As far as qualitative methods, in-depth interviews with cotton farmers and key stakeholders were really crucial for this area. They provide a little bit more contextual insight, help gather data that were difficult to measure through the survey, addressed research biases and triangulated patterns from surveys, and explained unexpected results that did show up in that survey. So for some of our findings, we saw that farmers tend to be more familiar with organic cotton farming practices after having interacted with related organizations. So to kind of touch on that, 77% of BCI licensed organic cotton farmers self-identify as organic farmers and the rest do not, which is really interesting because that shows that even though these farmers are licensed organic by BCI, 33% of them don't identify as that, so that presents a lot of opportunity for growth in this project. Organic cotton farmers use more land than conventional cotton farmers, which just kind of goes along with organic farming, and one of the trade-offs there with not using those chemicals is usually that a little bit more land is required. There are more non-exclusive than exclusive organic cotton farmers. That's something that tends to be overlooked. So just because a farmer isn't necessarily using only organic practices, that doesn't mean that they aren't still using some of those organic tactics in their conventional farming. So maybe being able to provide that education to convert them over to that fully BCI organic farming is a possibility moving forward with this project. And then it is widely held as a perspective that organic cotton farming is less costly, which is also an opportunity in this project. So just to go over the assessors real quick, this project was contracted by the CNA Foundation, which is based off of the CNA company. They promote sustainable fashion and utilize a lot of organic fabrics. They contracted in the American Institutes for Research and Outline India. They designed and conducted the SIA together, and then ThinkStep India designed and conducted the EIA portion of this study. So as a critique of the qualifications, the project, as I said, was contracted by the CNA Foundation. They may have a little bit of a bias just because they are so involved in the sustainable fashion industry. But all in all, I think that they do have really good motives with doing this study. And contracting AIR and Outline India was really smart because they do kind of balance each other out with those biases and the internal and external resources, as far as one being located within India and then one being based in the United States. And then ThinkStep, as far as doing that EIA, they are also an India-based company. They specialize in software and data consulting, so they were able to create some of the software that was needed to conduct those surveys and those studies. So as a critique of the data collection, I think the biggest flaw that I noticed in this SIA was the quantitative data collection occurring in January and February of 2018, while the harvest season was in January to April of 2017, which allowed considerable time for recall bias. And that is something that they did touch on within the SIA, which I really appreciated them acknowledging that big gap in time and the fact that that may cause some recall bias. They did limit surveys to 60 minutes to prevent survey fatigue, which I thought was a really great tactic. They initially had it at 45 minutes and realized that that wasn't enough time to get all the information they needed, so they did lengthen it, but they didn't want to make it too lengthy that they were losing that valuable information. They did conduct a pilot test to kind of get a feel for the local context and how the survey was going, which I also thought was a really smart tactic to use. As a critique of the comparative analysis, there wasn't really an explicit comparative analysis in this SIA, which I did think was a little bit of a downfall. But they did do that piloting and pre-testing that I was talking about in the last slide. And they do reference some comparisons when they do that. And there was a significant literature review. A lot of that was based on BCI standards, which are referenced pretty frequently throughout this SIA. As far as the standards that they do qualify some of those organic cotton farmers with. So I was a little bit worried that some of the literature might be biased just because they weren't looking outside of those BCI standards, but I do think that they had a lot of really great literature to back up that sort of lack of a comparative analysis. As a critique of public participation and involvement, I love that all of the participants were involved and had to consent to the survey in advance just to kind of keep ethics in the forefront of this project. I like that they involved some Indian-based organizations like Outline India and ThinkStep, and all members of the survey were Indian cotton farmers, which is really great because that means that all of their responses are within that target. So as a summary of the social impacts, reduced use of reduced use of chemicals in cotton farming will likely improve health of farmers and their families. This is kind of a generalization, which I will touch on here in a second, but I think that it is great moving forward because it does focus on the health of the families and not as much the product that's being exported. As far as increased organic cotton farming practices, that may increase workload for female farmers, which they display as a big positive in this report. I do have a little bit of a concern about the fair treatment of women in this industry and fair pay, but that's not really something they go into too much depth on. So that is kind of a residual question after reading this SIA. They do have a great theory of change chart if you want to look in the actual SIA document that they show kind of their plan for how they see this project going and the assumptions that are being made in the process of that. Just to kind of go back to that flaw in the data, a lot of these social impacts are a bit of a generalization, and I think that that is because of that big gap in the data where they went from 2017 to 2018. The information isn't super reliable because it is a little bit older. So I did put this quote in here from the SIA where they said the above referenced studies suffer from methodological weakness that limit their ability to draw robust conclusions. So that is something to keep in mind with these social impacts. So as a summary for mitigation strategies, this is something that they also did not go into too much depth on, but 2 points that I did want to pull out from this SIA were implementing a conversion period where farmers would establish an organic management system and build soil fertility, assuming that farmers are willing to wait, and organic seeds and pesticides would be available to farmers. So those are two potential options that they were discussing. I like that they don't exclusively require outside intervention and it can be done internally. So also as a summary, monitoring strategies, training inspectors who monitor organic growing practices and water and soil management by farmers. So similar to the last slide, I really like that these could also be done internally. Being able to train people within this state, I think, is a great way to keep people involved. So I like that they didn't rule that option out. I'm not going to bore anyone by reading through these. I know we've all looked at this about a million times. So as far as the 8 principles of international SIA, I think that despite some of the flaws in this SIA, they did do a good job meeting all of these requirements as far as human rights, ethics, environmental considerations. They did not stray from the eight principles of international SIA. So the final grade that I wanted to give this SIA is a B minus. There was that flaw in the data where there was that big gap in time. I think that put a big hindrance on the progression of this project, and led to a lot of generalizations. There was no explicit comparative analysis, which I also thought was a big negative, but there was good survey sampling techniques, a good variety of organizations involved, both local and foreign, and I love that they conducted both an SIA and an EIA in this project. So I know that I did kind of gloss over some things. Definitely take the time to look through that SIA document if you get a chance. I think there was some really great stuff in there, and feel free to ask me anything that you have any questions about. Thank you, guys.